thank you very much for staying with us at Still AM Live, because you listened a couple of minutes ago to motivation for you for the week. And it's important that you make that shift, which is what Pastor Bukigberu said. But away from that, onto our interview segment. Globally, there's been a consistent call for fight to reduce the HIV epidemic, HIV and AIDS epidemic across the world. And it's gotten to a point there is a specific day designated to making more conscious efforts towards achieving a reduction in the spread of the epidemic. Today, we're looking at efforts at ensuring Nigerians and, of course, people across the world know their status, and the focus is on HIV, know your status. I'm being joined by Dr. Adeleye Babarinsa. He's a medical expert, and we're going to be looking at the scourge, how further we can go to reducing its spread, and how important it is for Nigerians specifically to know their status and the importance of knowing your status. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. It's always a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Just before we go more into the program, I'd like you to watch this little excerpt on word 8, on HIV. Thank you very much for staying with us at Still AM Live, and of course, just a very short video clip you saw to helping you understand the extent that the HIV/AIDS epidemic is going, and of course, how important we need to do more to ensuring that the deaths rising from this disease, as it were, is reduced, and that people can be more sensitized to knowing what could lead to contacting the infection, and what they need to do differently once they realize that they have come in contact with it. But of course, I'm not going to be doing all of the talking. Dr. Babarinsa would be helping with that. Just before we get so much more into it, just a couple of statistics. Nigeria in 2017, of course, looking at reports from 2017, Nigeria has about 3.1 million people living with HIV. And of course, 2.8% adult HIV prevalence of persons between ages 15 and 49. 210,000 persons have new HIV infections, and around 150,000 AIDS-related deaths there are in Nigeria. 34% adults are on antiretroviral treatment, and 26% of children are on antiretroviral treatment. All adults and children living with HIV are about over 3.1 million persons. And I'd like to ask you, my first question is, just before we got back on here, we were talking about how it is that Nigeria has the second highest rate of HIV and AIDS related cases, and it has the highest number of deaths rising from HIV and AIDS. And I mean, over time, we've talked about how Nigeria has to improve on its health sector, do the needful, do that, and several other things. But what's the implication of these figures for Nigeria?
Obviously, it's a challenge to Nigeria because, just as you said, Nigeria has the second highest number of people living with HIV all over the world. I mean, that's about 3.1 million. That's a real large number, you know, in the population. That's almost the number of the whole states in certain states of the country. We're only second to South Africa. And that tells you that we have a lot to do. You know, most people looking at us today feel HIV, I'm not HIV positive. But the truth is that it's an infectious disease. So the more people that have it, the more you and I are at risk of having it. So I think it's a challenge to us to wake up from our slumber and do something about this scourge.
Thank you. It's a call to Nigeria to wake up from its slumber and do the needful. 30 years after the first campaign on HIV and AIDS, the first campaign, and of course was the first global health campaign made across the world, was 1988.
Yes. 30
years after, we're still asking that Nigeria rises up to its responsibility. Are we anywhere close to being serious with this particular issue?
I think we're doing a lot. It's just that we need to be more proactive because in 1991, probably because of the lower population and lower awareness, HIV/AIDS prevalence in Nigeria was about 1.8, thereabout, and it rose steadily to about 5.8 in 2001, and we have experienced a drop as at 2016 it was about 3.2%. Now we're talking about 2.8%. So it means that translates to the fact that there is increased awareness, there is increased treatments, and probably we have less deaths from HIV in Nigeria. So we must commend ourselves, but we must be targeting getting to 0% or 0 point something, which is what a lot of populations enjoy, so that the risk is much less. So it means that we can still do a lot, you know, and get to the level where many developed countries in the world have gotten to.
Thank you very much. Now, while we throw the beam light on Nigeria, let's look at Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember growing up having to see the late Princess Diana embark on some efforts, some sensitization efforts, and some efforts at ensuring that Africa deals with the scourge way back 1990s.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, if that's one of the things I remember about the late Princess Diana, and it tells about how much the developed countries have given attention to the scourge in their home countries, and how Africa is somewhat dependent on foreign aids and dealing with it, as it depends on several other aids to develop its continent. Let me ask you, you talked about South Africa being the country with the highest, with the highest rate of HIV/AIDS related cases. And of course, Nigeria is second to it. And of course, the rest on the trunk of countries with high rates of HIV and AIDS are African nations.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, what does this spell for Africa? We've talked about Nigeria, but what does this mean for Africa? Are we paying less attention to our health? Are we being like a desicle in protecting ourselves, especially from coming in contact with this infection?
I think Africa is a country faced with a lot of challenges, you know, from numerous war in different nations in Africa, to the challenge of illiteracy, to the challenge of underdevelopment, and some countries being ruled by military governments, you know, and lack of democracy in certain countries. So Africa has suffered a lot when it comes to talking about socially, and HIV is one disease that has been aggravated by many of these things. Of course, you know, during war, you have a lot of cases of rape and things like that. And it's interesting that you know that the statistics in Africa are staggering. For example, in Swaziland, which has actually the highest percentage of people living with HIV, it's not necessarily the highest number. South Africa has the highest number, but not the highest percentage, because it is calculated in different ways. Because Swaziland has a small population. In Swaziland, 25% of people have HIV/AIDS. That means that 1 in every 4 people in Swaziland has HIV/AIDS. The same thing too in places like Botswana, you know, and Lesotho and some other African countries. The population is very, very high, and it's important that we know that Africa accounts for about 2/3 or 2/3 of people all over the world with HIV/AIDS. So it's something that is a serious problem in Africa, and it's something that the the African Union really has to sit down and think about what we can do to reduce HIV drastically, so that we don't watch HIV destroy people in Africa.
Thank you very much. Talk about what the African nations individually can do and what the African Union as a body can do towards helping its continent overcome the epidemic. One of the things that the global body, the WHO, and of course UNAIDS has said over time is the importance of persons knowing their status.
Exactly.
And of course, just before we look into why there seems to be a challenge with taking the test and knowing your status and dealing with the results of whatever tests are carried out on you, let me ask you, HIV and AIDS, I mean, some talks have been ongoing on how it's contacted, unprotected sex, the use of unsterilized objects and the rest of them. Could you talk more on how this epidemic has spread over time?
Yes, that's very, very important. There are several means by which this disease is spread from one person to another. And one of the most common ways that we all know about is through unprotected sexual intercourse, because we believe that even with a person that is infected, if the intercourse is protected by using barrier contraceptives, the chance of transfer from one person to another is much reduced. So one of the ways is promoted is by unsafe or unprotected sexual intercourse, even though we still tell people that the best safety precaution is to avoid abstinence or be faithful to your spouse. You know, another way this virus is being transmitted from one person to another is through blood transfusion, and that's why we encourage that laboratories ensure that blood are well screened before being given to another patient, because once the patient with HIV gives his blood to someone that is HIV negative, then the person is likely to have HIV. Another common way it's being transmitted is by mother-to-child transmission, and that's very pathetic, because these children are virtually innocent.
Absolutely.
And they leave their mother's womb with HIV. But interestingly, this can be prevented if the woman goes through a standard hospital and the necessary precautions are made. A woman that is HIV positive can give birth to an HIV negative child. Other ways these viruses are transmitted includes through the use of sharps, instruments that are not sterilized, and that could happen when people go to to have an haircut at the barbing salon with not sterilized or with someone else's clip. Could also happen when people do manicure and pedicure with sharp instruments and many other things. So it's important that we avoid all these means. But we must also know that there are some ways that HIV is not transmitted. HIV cannot be transmitted by hugging, by cannot be transmitted by living with someone with HIV or by talking with the person. It doesn't get transmitted all through this way. So that means that that people have HIV doesn't mean we cannot live normally with them. You know, like talk with them, play with them, eat with them, as long as there is no exchange of blood, you know, or body fluids. So it's important we know that, so we don't isolate or stigmatize people living with HIV.
Absolutely. You talk about, I'll pick out on the last things, some of the last words, how you cannot contact HIV and AIDS.
Yes.
And you say when you do not share some of the belongings, some of the things belonging to the person who's got HIV and AIDS.
Yes.
Let's break it down. I mean,
Okay.
I understand I could use some of the eating utensils of someone living with HIV and AIDS and not contacted.
Yes.
But of course, I cannot use some other things belonging to this person. So I'd like you to help break it down.
Well, basically, we must know that there are basic rules of hygiene, you know, in the sense that you should keep your environment clean and you should respect people's properties. So you don't necessarily have to drink, you know, from a cup that another person has taken water from necessarily. You understand? But it's important we know that these things, because we're talking about at times people that live within the same family. We are just trying to emphasize the point that peradventure there is need for some of these things. Maybe you have to drink water from the same cup or eat from the same plate.
Am I safe if I did that?
Yes, or even wear the same clothes and all that. Those things there, you don't transmit HIV, even though we don't encourage people to do such necessarily. You know, and things like even hugging, of course, that or whatever. So we are saying, we were saying this so that people don't isolate these people, because HIV is not transferred through those routes. But things like use of sharp objects, for example, sharing the same blade, sharing the same clipper, sharing, using the same needle or sharp objects that other person has used, that could be a means through which HIV can be transferred from a person that has HIV to the person that doesn't have.
Thank you very much. So it's better understood that there are objects, there are things you can share with someone who's got HIV and AIDS, and there are some things you cannot share, which would lead me to the next question of stigmatization. I mean, oftentimes talk about people taking up the courage to go on to tests and know their status. Many have not done this out of fear of, if I eventually test, I mean, if I tested positive to HIV and AIDS, what happens to me? I get intentionally or unintentionally secluded. Fingers are pointed at me. I'm going to give myself as an example. The first and only HIV and AIDS test or HIV test I took was in 2003. No, 2009. Yeah, I was about leaving school, and then my friends and I, we just finished one of the class, and we said, I mean, let's go. There's this center in school. Let's go do. And of course, I remember I was scared. I knew I had not done some things that could have gotten me contacting the infection, but I was scared, and we went for it. And when you had to wait for the test, I mean, it took a while. They were already counseling you, and you're almost thinking, I mean, the tests are not even out yet. So let me ask you, taking the test, why does it come with so much burden? Why does it come with so much fear? And of course, the stigma that comes with, she even went for the test in the first instance. Why would she go for it? Why are we on that point?
First, I would have loved to pick on you. I want to believe what you were saying, because you said the first and only time you checked it. So are you saying that you've not checked it after that?
2009, I was in part 3, 2009, then I just went.
So you've not checked it after that time? So please, I want to go and check it. So we don't send a wrong signal to those listening to us. Yes, because knowing your status is the first thing that is very important when it comes to preventing HIV. I'm going to answer your question. That's the first thing. And when you go to developed parts of the world, virtually everybody knows their status. Why? Because they have an established healthcare system, that everybody has a healthcare facility that they find it easy to access. And of course, in a good healthcare facility, one of the things they will encourage you to do is to know your status. But unfortunately, most of us in this country don't even have facilities we go to. We have a poor healthcare system in this country, and that's one of the reasons why in Africa most people don't know their status. And I really want people to know about one of the targets of the United Nations. It's called the 1990 strategy. And what they're saying is that by 2020, 90% of people should know their status. Unfortunately, we're in 2019, and probably less than 50% of Nigerians know their status. And they are saying that out of the 90% that know their status, that's the next 90% of them should have commenced treatment. You know, and it's important we know that not everybody, I mean, you read the statistics earlier, not everybody, if I mention less than 50% of those that know their status have commenced treatment. So people feel if they use the treatment, they will have side effects and all that. Then they're also saying that out of the 90% that have commenced treatment, 90% of them should have been virally suppressed. But I'll quickly go back to the question you asked about why people have so much fear in knowing their status. The first thing I realize is that there are even some people that think that, because I had to ask myself and ask my client many times why people don't want to check their status. One of the mistakes people make many times, and many people feel, I can't be positive. I don't do sex. I have my own clipper. I do everything right. I can't be positive. Or I'm anointed or something, you know, and that's one big mistake people make. Because if the person is positive and lives with that mindset, the person will be detecting late, which is a big problem. Because HIV doesn't show on the face. But if you wait on it, you come up with the disease before checking, that would be very, very late. The second reason people don't check is the fear you mentioned. What if I'm positive? The first thing is I can't be positive. The second thing is, what if I'm positive? But the answer is simple. If you are positive and it is detected early, then you can commence treatment. There's a big difference between HIV and AIDS. HIV is the virus. A person will have the virus and live normally for 40, 50, 60 years and nobody knows. But what the virus does is that the virus destroys the immune system. It's like a nation coming to fight against our nation and destroys all our soldiers. So that means that all of us become slaves. So that person now becomes a victim of all kinds of diseases and illnesses that normally the body will overcome normally. But you see, if a person discovers it on time, then the person can commence medications to fight against the virus, thereby preserving the immune system, preserving the military forces that fight against sicknesses. And that means that the person can now live for a very long time. But if the person is using the drug at the time when virtually all the immune system is gone, then even with the drugs, there might be little improvement. And that's why we see people very thin, emaciated. Those are people that have come up with AIDS. And that's what we are trying to prevent when we tell people to know their status. Another reason why I know people do not know their status, aside from the fact that some people feel they are negative, some people I think what if they are positive. And that reason why I know people don't check for their status is because some people actually want to check for it, but they don't know where they can go to. And some people think that they don't even have the money to check it. But let us know that checking your status is free of charge. There are several primary health care centers around that you can check. If you are in doubt, you can go to UCH and you can check it there. You can go to the state hospitals. It is free of charge. And anybody that charges you money for checking, please let us know wherever the person is. That must be legal. Okay, except maybe private facilities, and that's their choice. You understand? So please, we all need to check it. We all need, it's practically impossible really to achieve the 90% know your status by 2020. But let's see how Nigerians we can improve
by 2000 and what did you say?
2020, which is 2 years.
Thank
you know,
you.
but I really don't know how that's going to happen. But that's the target, you know, of the United Nations. And there are several countries in the world that have gone beyond 90%. And I think that we can work towards it as Nigerians.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we can work towards that. But of course, just recently, the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, speaking ahead of the World AIDS Day celebration, that say that Nigeria is working at ending HIV and AIDS epidemic by the year 2030, which was why I wanted to be clear on what you said. We'll look at the implication of the 2030 deadline and setting. Of course, talk about the attitude of the towards for health, for checking their status after this short break. Do stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us. It's still AM Live, and we're still talking about HIV, know your status. It's important to guarantee a reduction in the spread and the fight against, the win against HIV and AIDS in Nigeria. And my guest is still Dr. Adeleye Babarinsa. He is a medical expert, and of course we've said a lot about the importance of Nigeria working together, Nigeria working as a nation and the African continent working together towards ensuring that we fall off the chart of countries with the highest rate of HIV/AIDS cases in the continent and across the world globally. And of course, just before we went on the break, we did talk about the importance of going on for the test. You mentioned the test is free.
Yes.
And I mean, it's just okay for everyone to go. You already challenged me to go for the test,
yes.
and I'm going to go for the test anyways. But I'm going to let you into the result of my test. It's confidential.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Now, let's look into, you talk about the cost of the test being free.
Yes. And
just during the break, we looked into the cost of the antiretroviral drugs,
yes.
which you say they're even free.
Yes.
And of course, we saw an information released by the Minister for Health, Isaac Adewale, stating that a new drug, Dote, let me see.
Yeah.
Exactly, you helped me with that.
Yeah.
Dolutegravir,
yeah.
It's a new drug being used in Nigeria. But he did say that it is only affordable by some who can afford.
Obviously.
Which is why I want to ask you, if we say the antiretroviral drugs are free,
yes.
and we have some drugs
yes.
that are sold, how then do we create a balance between, I mean, those who can readily afford and those who cannot afford it, but who have the infection, the HIV infection? How do we ensure that we have a balanced win over the HIV and AIDS spread in Nigeria if we have to buy some drugs or get some drugs free?
First, we understand that the drug in question is a new drug, which I still believe is still undergoing trials because it has been seen to cure HIV to a large extent. I think reduce up to 99% of the virus or so, compared to the drugs that we have that more of suppress it. So it's a new drug and it's not readily available yet in the market, and it's very, very expensive. But we must know that there are old drugs that have been used, that is currently being used, and those drugs are free. So pending while people try to afford the new drug, they should still make use of the old drug. The old drug does not cure HIV. What it does essentially is that it suppresses the virus so that the person can live a normal life. So, and it is free of charge. So while we hope that very soon the United Nations, WHO, and the G8 countries of the world would work hard to see how we can make this new drug available to everybody so that we can reduce the scourge of HIV to a large extent, I think we should still make do with what we currently have.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Now, just before we're on the break, I did let you know the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, did say Nigeria is working hard to ending the HIV/AIDS scourge in Nigeria by the year 2030. And of course, my guest told me, because there is the 2030 deadline for many laudable projects countries should, I mean, be showing off, even right about now. And I'm going to ask you, what's the implication of setting the SDG deadline, the 2030 deadline for ending HIV and AIDS in Nigeria? And I asked you how seriously this puts us as a country that is working at getting itself up the second position on the chart of countries who have HIV, persons infected with HIV and AIDS in the African continent, and of course globally.
I love to be frank when it comes to talking about healthcare in Nigeria, because many times we hear a lot of political statements. I'm not against what Professor Yemi Osinbajo is saying, but we just have to be real, because we work in the healthcare sector. Many things are wrong currently as we speak. As we speak currently, our primary healthcare system is virtually not existent, because you have few facilities where you can operate as standard healthcare facilities. Today we have health workers going on strike every now and then. Health workers are poorly motivated. Today we have brain drain. You know, a lot of young professionals leaving the country at a very alarming rate. So things seem to be going down in the healthcare sector. And if we leave these basic things, because the question is, who are the people that would provide care for this health care for these people with HIV/AIDS? Where are the health facilities that would take care of them? You know, is it the workers that are not motivated? So I think in as much as the country needs to work hard on our drive to ensure that we reduce the period of HIV maximally by 2030. We have to be careful in paying attention to little details that are fast destroying our healthcare system. Because any vibrant healthcare system will be able to deal with the issue of HIV/AIDS.
Thank you. And finally, as much as we're encouraging people to get out, get tested, and know their status and keep going, for as many as have done the test and realized they're HIV positive, what's the word for them?
First, I want us to make it clear that there's a clear difference between HIV and AIDS. HIV is a virus, human immunodeficiency virus. AIDS is the disease. And usually there's a long time between when a person contracts that virus, HIV, and when the person develops AIDS. Usually between 7 to 20 years, an average of 8 years. So if you're listening to me right now and you've tested, checked your HIV status and you're positive, I would rather tell you congratulations, because you didn't wait until it was too late before you realized that you were positive. So I want to encourage you, it is not a death sentence, it's just a challenge for you to go to a proper health facility, commence treatment, and make sure you take good care of your health and you'll be able to live normally like any individual on earth.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And it's on that note, the fact that HIV, if you've tested HIV, positive to HIV, it's no death sentence. It's only a challenge to propel you to doing the right things, taking care of yourself, and of course encouraging others to go out and get tested as soon as they possibly can, so they can know early and do the right thing. It's a call out to everyone to work together to make so much awareness on HIV and AIDS, and that we would work together to reduce the scourge, and of course hand Nigeria a status lower. I mean, beneath the second position it currently holds of countries who have persons living with HIV and AIDS across the world. But the much we can really take on the program, just go out, get tested. I'm going to do my test also. And of course, Dr. Babarinsa said it's important we do that. Thank you so much for coming on the program, Sam. It's a pleasure having you as well. Yeah, until next time when we meet on the program, do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. I am Olajumoke Babalola.